So, as we conclude this study on the power of vision, this is a vast subject. I've been studying this for quite a long time, years and years, and I'll be studying it till the day I die. You know, somebody said the biggest room in the world is room for improvement. And so I know this, that until the Lord takes us from this earth, there's going to be room for improvement. But I want to do something today that I think will be a blessing. There's a book that really impacted my life, and it's called Acres of Diamonds. And it's by Russell Conwell. It's public domain. You can probably Google it, and I think you can find copies you can just download, you can print, and don't even have to purchase them. But I'll tell you, Acres of Diamonds is one of the most impactful true stories I've ever heard. Now, Russell Conwell, I didn't know this till some years back. If you've ever heard of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, that's the Russell Conwell. And he was a Baptist pastor, but not your typical Baptist pastor, because he believed that Christians should succeed. And if anybody ought to have money, he said it ought to be believers. Basically, he had the mindset the gospel's free, but the road it travels on is very expensive to get it around the world. And so there's a couple things as we lead up to that. But this is going to bless you, because one of the impacts, he used to preach this message all over the country. He pastored Baptist Temple up in Philadelphia. Of course, he's been long gone now to be with the Lord. But this impacted so many people, but it applies to us no matter where we're at. You could be watching this in a foreign country, and this message, I think, is going to speak to you. But, you know, we talked about discovering the law of recognition. What is the law of recognition? Well, it's very simple. Everything you need in life is already present, awaiting your recognition. And so Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 12 says, "The hearing ear and the seeing eye, the Lord hath made even both of them." You know what's interesting? The very first copy of Acres of Diamonds I ever bought cost me $0.25. I bought it in one of the big box stores. This is a very long time ago. Probably would have been about 45 plus years ago. And there was a discount rack, and it contained As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. It was 2 books in one, and Acres of Diamonds. And I'd never heard of it. And I looked at it, and it was a discounted to $0.25, brand new book. I still have that book to this day. But it's interesting that there are sometimes some of the most valuable things are hidden right in plain sight. You know, people make the mistake of thinking that geographical location alone is the key to great success. There's nations around the world, you know, if you go to India or you go to Africa, they are rich in natural resources. But let's take India, for instance. They worship over 300 million gods, pretty much. Hinduism is the prominent religion there. There are some Muslims, and then there is a growing grassroots of Christianity, but very difficult place for Christianity to thrive. It's very hostile to the gospel. And yet, the story I'm going to be telling you today is going to reference of a spot in India, and I'll tell you about that shortly. But even Bishop David Oyedepo, who is in Lagos, Nigeria, he said, "I have seen many Africans run to Europe, run to America," and understand his terminology. He says, only to become New Age slaves. In other words, they thought, if I could just get to Europe, just get to America, I'm gonna be wealthy, I'm going to be rich. And he said that he would never leave Nigeria. He would never leave Africa, because that is where God has him. And I want to encourage you, no matter where God has you, don't look at the limitations. Seek the Lord and ask him to give you the hearing ear and the seeing eye. And this story is going to impact, I think, in a great way. Remember, we covered this. Success is an inside job. In other words, prosperity begins in you, according to 3 John 2. Beloved, I wish above all things thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as your soul prospers. So as your soul prospers, your mind, your will, and emotions, then you can begin to prosper. When you study what John said there in 3 John 2, it's talking about succeeding in business. The Lord said that. He said, I am the Lord that teaches you to profit. God is not into poverty. And poverty was a curse of the law, a result of disobedience. God desires to prosper us. It's only disobedience that gets us in trouble. So what I did was, back in this old syllabus that I'd put together many years ago, I had a section in here and I called it Recovering a Wasted Life. And it's my synopsis of the Acres of Diamonds. And some of the things I'm going to just read to you from that I've put together. But Russell Conwell's Acres of Diamonds may very well be one of the more popular speeches ever made in the history of the American lecture platform. It is certainly one of the most enduring as well as inspiring. Russell Conwell was pastor of the famed Baptist Temple in Philadelphia, and he had a very unique method for delivering his lecture. When he would arrive into town to deliver the lecture, he would visit the postmaster or the school principal, ministers, factory workers at their benches. He would also go out, ring a few doorbells, talk to the local housewives. And this was done so he could learn about the town, its history, the people, and what opportunities they had and what they had failed to do. As he delivered his lecture, Conwell would get up and point out the acres of diamonds in their own backyards, and it never failed. So the story began like this. True story, what I'm about to read to you. While traveling down the Tigris and Euphrates River many years ago with a party of English travelers, Russell Conwell found himself under the direction of an old Arab guide who had been hired at Baghdad. Wearying the travelers with story after story, he got their attention by saying, I will tell you a story now, which I reserve for my particular friends. And this is the wealth that was ignored. He said there was a Persian by the name of Ali Hafed who lived not far from the river Indus. The man owned a very large farm that had orchards, grain fields, and gardens. He had money at interest, was a wealthy and contented man. One day a priest visited Ali Hafed. He sat down by the fire and told that old farmer how this world of ours was made. He commenced to tell him that a diamond was a congealed drop of sunlight, and that if he had one diamond the size of his thumb, he could purchase the county. And if he had a mine of diamonds, he could place his children upon thrones through the influence of their great wealth. Hafed heard all about the diamonds, heard how much they were worth, and went to bed that night a poor man. Not that he had lost anything, but he was poor because he was discontented, and discontented because he feared he was poor. Boy, that is the state of a lot of Americans right there, and yet we're wealthy beyond measure. He said to himself, I want a mine of diamonds, and he lay awake all night. So he sold his farm, collected his money, left his family in the charge of a neighbor, and went away in search of diamonds. In his search, he went through Palestine, wandered on into Europe. When all his money was spent and he was in poverty and rags, he stood at the shore on Barcelona, Spain, and when he had a great tidal wave came rolling in, he could not resist the temptation to cast himself into the tide to end his wretched life, commit suicide. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, the man who had purchased Ali Hafed's farm one day led his camel into the garden to drink. As the camel put his nose into the water of the brook, Hafed's successor noticed a curious flash of light from the white sands of the stream. He pulled out a black stone, having an eye of light reflecting all the hues of the rainbow. He took the stone into the house and placed it on the mantle of the fireplace, forgot all about it. Sometime later, the old priest came in to visit Hafed's successor. When he entered the room, he saw a flash of light on the mantle. He rushed up to it and shouted, "Here's a diamond. Has Ali Hafed returned?" "Oh no," the man replied. "Hafed has not returned. That's not a diamond. It's nothing but a stone we found right here in our own garden." The priest replied, "I tell you, I know a diamond when I see it, and this is a diamond." Together they rushed out to the old garden, stirred up the white sands with their fingers, and they found more beautiful and valuable gems than the first. Thus, said the guide, and it is historically true, was discovered the diamond mine of Golconda, the most magnificent diamond mine in the history of mankind. Some of the largest crown jewels of England and Russia that decorate their crowns came from that very mine. The moral of the story, the guide continued on, was that had Hafed remained at home and dug in his own backyard, underneath his own wheat fields, or in his own garden, instead of wretchedness, starvation, and death by suicide in a strange land, he would have had acres of diamonds. For every acre of that old farm afterward revealed gems which have since decorated the crowns of monarchs. I want to share this with you. I actually researched some of the famous diamonds that came from that mine. And years ago, and I still have the PowerPoints in my slides, there was a diamond that was auctioned at Christie's that came from the Golconda diamond mine. And I believe one diamond sold for $12 million. That's just one of them. So the story continues, because Russell Conwell would travel around and tell that particular story, but he also visited people right there in the town. So I wrote here, closer to home. A similar story was that of a man in California in 1847 who owned a ranch. He heard that gold had been discovered in Southern California, and he left with a passion to go find gold. He sold his ranch to a Colonel Sutter and headed off to find his fortune. Some of you already know what this is. Colonel Sutter put a mill upon the stream that ran through the ranch. One day his little girl brought some wet sand from the raceway into their home and sifted through it with her fingers before the fire. In that sand, a visitor saw the first shining scales of real gold that were discovered in California. The man who had previously owned that ranch had wanted gold, and he could have secured it merely for the taking. Over $38 million had been taken out in a few acres since then. Now remember, that was in 1847. Russell Conwell had delivered his lecture many years ago in a city that stands on that farm, and they told him that a one-third owner had been getting $120 in gold every 15 minutes for years and years, whether he was asleep or awake. Now, this is a long time ago. How many of you know that if we were getting that right now, that would be a lot of money? Yet, an even better illustration occurred in Conwell's own state of Pennsylvania. A man owned a farm and decided to sell the farm. Before he sold it, he decided to secure employment collecting coal oil for his cousin, who was in that business in Canada, where oil was first discovered on this continent. At that time, they dipped it from running streams. Conwell continued that this man did not leave his farm until he had something else to do his work. When this man wrote to his cousin for employment, his cousin replied that he could not hire him because he knew nothing about the oil business. The farmer said that he would learn, and with tremendous zeal, he set himself to study the subject. He studied until he knew what it looked like, smelled like, tasted like, and how to refine it. He then wrote a letter to his cousin saying he understood the oil business now. His cousin answered, "All right, come out and join me." Oh gosh, these stories are so amazing. So this man sold his farm according to county record for $833. It's a long time ago. He had no sooner left the place than the man who had purchased it went to arrange for watering the cattle. He found that the previous owner had gone out years before and placed a plank across the brook at the back of the barn. The purpose of the plank was to provide a way across the book which contained a dreadful-looking scum, which cattle would not touch. It was discovered that the man who had gone to Canada in search of a better-paying job had himself been damming up for 23 years a flood of oil which state geologist of Pennsylvania declared 10 years later was worth, even then, $100 million. Surely that would be in the billions now. To the state. In 1956, a geologist declared the discovery to be worth $1 billion to the state of Pennsylvania. So think about that. In 1956, worth $1 billion to the state. You know it would be so much more today. So as the story goes, the man who owned the territory in which the state of Titusville now stands, who had studied the subject of oil until he knew all about it, sold the whole property for $833. Russell Conwell had yet another illustration from the state of Massachusetts. It was about a young man who went to Yale College and studied mines and mining and became such an adept mining engineer that he was employed by authorities of the university to train students who were behind in their classes. During his senior year, he earned $15 a week for that job. When he graduated, they raised his pay from $15 to $45 a week and offered him a professorship. The young man was apparently insulted that a man of his caliber would be offered only $45 a week. He went home and told his mother that he would not work for $45 a week and suggested they go to California and stake out gold or silver mine and be immensely rich. So they sold out in Massachusetts. Instead of going to California, they went to Wisconsin, where he went to work at the Superior Copper Mining Company at $15 a week. He included a provision in his contract that he would have an interest in any mine that he should discover for the company. Apparently, he never found or discovered any mines, but Conwell did know what happened on that man's old homestead back in Massachusetts. The new owner of the land went out to dig potatoes on his new property. One day, while harvesting potatoes, he noticed, as he dragged a basket along the ground, a block of native silver 8 inches square. Mind you, the professor of mines, mining, and mineralogy, who knew so much about the subject that he would not work for $45 a week when he sold his homestead in Massachusetts, sat right on that silver. The young man was born on that homestead, brought up there, had gone back and forth, rubbing the stone with his sleeve until it reflected his countenance. And it seemed to say, here's $100,000 right down here just for the taking, but he would not take it. Conwell concludes by saying to his audience that as he spent the afternoon talking with people and inquiring here and there, he again, in his audience, what through 50 years of his life has continually seen, that men today are making precisely the same mistake. They're sitting presently on acres of diamonds and untold wealth if they would only look around and see. Conwell would continue to speak to his audience and say that to them that they ought to get rich, and it was their duty to get rich. Many times he would be asked, do you as a Christian minister spend your time going up and down the country advising young people to get rich, to get money? Conwell would reply, of course I do. And they would say, isn't that awful? Why don't you preach the gospel instead of preaching to men about money? Conwell would reply, because to make money honestly is to preach the gospel. That is the reason. The men who get rich in this country may be the most honest men you find in the community. He was convinced that 98 out of 100 of the rich men in America are honest, and that is why they are rich. That is why they're entrusted with money. That is why they carry on great enterprises and find plenty of people to work with them. It is because they are honest men. Someone would reply, but I hear of men who get millions of dollars dishonestly. Well, of course that is true, but it is such a rare thing that newspapers talk about them all the time as a matter of news until you get the idea that all rich men got rich dishonestly. So the Baptist pastor Russell Conwell made this point, that money is power, and a people, especially Christians, should be reasonably ambitious to have it. You ought to have it because you can do more good with it than you can without it. Money prints our Bibles. Money builds our churches. Money sends our missionaries. Money pays your preachers. And you would not have many of them if you couldn't pay them. The people who get the largest salary can do the most good with the power that is furnished to them if their spirit is right to use it for the purpose it was given to them. Conwell believed that Christians should have money. If you can honestly attain riches, it is your Christian and godly duty to do so. It was an awful mistake for Christians to think that they must be poor in order to be pious. Now, there's a point in sharing this story with you. You know, no matter how many times I hear it or how many times I read it, all I can think of is repeated every single day in every community, every city, every state, every nation on the face of the earth. You know that God created the earth and the fullness of it. It was created for mankind. Everything, this is what the law of recognition is. Anything and everything we could ever need has already been created, awaiting our recognition. Do you know that, I don't know if some of you are old enough to remember, some of you probably are, but back in the 70s, I graduated from high school in 1976. And so back in the 70s, they were talking about the world is going to run out of oil. The world is going to run out of fuel. We're going to run out of space. And I don't know if you remember, but in California in particular, this was making national news. Lines upon lines of people. There were people that would shoot each other in lines waiting for gasoline. That is one of the biggest lies that has ever been perpetrated. They call it fossil fuels, but I won't even go there right now on this. Listen, it's an insult to God to say that He didn't plan out this earth, that we would run out. Yes, we need to be good stewards. But when you look at the oil reserves, just in Montana and Wyoming alone, they exceed anything and everything in Saudi Arabia. I've heard of things in Alaska. There is so much wealth in this world. You know, the laws of nature speak of nature's God. And that's what makes America so unique. Man, we are a country that has generated untold wealth. And it's not because we are necessarily richer in resources, because if you go to other parts of the world, India and Africa, there are some parts of the world that they are so much more richer in resources. But what happens is wherever the gospel goes and light comes, blessing comes. You know, I was in Africa not too awfully long ago, and I have friends. I actually know two people that were among the first 5 missionaries in Uganda. And 3 of them born again, 2 of them were like NGOs, but they were in Africa when it was very dangerous to be there. And I remember one of them telling me that when we were in downtown Kampala, which is a hustling, bustling community now, the traffic is almost overwhelming. It's amazing what's going on in Uganda, and it has some of the richest resources. But when they got there, it was like when we were driving through Kampala, a friend of mine told me, it was like a ghost town there. The country had been devastated by Idi Amin and Milton Obote, and Joseph Kony was displacing so many people. But as the gospel has come into that country, and it has come in a huge way, President Museveni has been a great friend of the church there. And I will tell you, this last trip, I went down there and I went into a grocery store, and it looked like one of our big box stores right here in America. I kid you not. It was like they had the meats, they had the groceries, it would be like going down where you can buy, appliances and all of these different things. And it's funny, so much of the world strives to be like America, even though The devil hates this country and is trying to destroy it. If the Christians will rise up and begin to look to God and see our nation come back to the Lord, America can come back into the fullness of its strength again. There's untold wealth. You know, we have all these politicians that create dependency, and that's the way they stay in office, and they're the only ones that are benefited by it. But I'm telling you, great things are ahead, and there's so much to cover on this subject of the power of vision. I'm trusting that you have taken some things from this series and that you will run with them. I want to pray over us as we close out. Father, I ask in the name of Jesus, you bless this people. May they be world changers. Lord, may they discover the acres of diamonds right there under their own feet, and we thank you for it. In Jesus' name, amen. And also there's a number on the screen. If you would like prayer today, we've got an awesome prayer team standing by right now. Would love to pray with you. So I encourage you to call them. And remember, download our vision devotional. Write your mission down. Discover that. Write your vision. Develop your strategies. Ask the Lord to show you the thoughts that you have gotten, what you need to capture, and what you need to pursue. Stir up the gift of God that's on the inside of you. No matter where you find yourself today, no matter how many wrong turns you've taken in life, I am telling you, God still has a destiny for you and a plan, and it's awesome, and it's called vision. So lay hold of the heavenly vision that God has for you. Thank you for watching this video, and be sure to explore more of my YouTube channel for more content like this. And if you want to learn more about what we do, or if you want to partner with us, be sure to visit my website at markcowart.org. May the Lord bless you richly.